Welcome everyone to another episode of Web3 Faces from the HOPR office in Zurich. Today I'm very happy to have my friend Meher Roy here from Course one of the biggest staking providers on the planet, and of course Epicenter. Epicenter is my favorite crypto podcast. And Meher is also personally responsible for, making me dive deep into the crypto rabbit hole. So today, I held him responsible to explain us about his journey into this wonderful ecosystem, what he does there and how he got there. Meher, so good to have you. Maybe we can start and you tell us what you did prior to crypto, which is actually pretty different, and how you started diving into crypto. Like, what did you do in these very beginning times? How was this journey for you?
Yeah, so I started my career in the vaccines industry at Novartis Vaccines, and nothing related to computers or programming. I was doing engineering and then supply chain management, which is basically how do you make sure that product gets manufactured and shipped. And somewhere along the line, so I've actually worked 7 years in the vaccines industry after university, and while working in this industry, I came across Bitcoin first in 2011, and then the second time in 2013, end of 2013, and I decided to end up making a career in crypto and ended up switching to it.
What was your impression when you saw that in 2011? Like, there's very few people who you can catch who got exposed to Bitcoin in 2011. Like, as a reminder, that was 1 year after the white paper was, no, 2 years after the white paper was published, and 1 year after the client was released. So it was literally, that was even before the Stone Age, I would say. So what was your impression when you looked at it the very first time then, if you remember?
Yeah, so actually, going back even further, right? So I started working professionally in 2010. Before that, I was in university. And when I was in university, 5 years I was in university, I used to study finance as in my part-time, and I also at some level wanted to be in investment banking. And I tried to get a job in those companies and I failed at it. So I was already quite keen on finance, first of all. So when I came across Bitcoin 2011, I read it in The Economist.
The Economist had something in 2011 on Bitcoin.
Yes, The Economist is extremely forward-thinking. The technology section was extremely forward-thinking. Now they've removed that section actually from the magazine. But that's where I read about Bitcoin, and I actually had a good impression of Bitcoin right from the start.
Okay.
Because at some level, like growing up in India, I could see there was a lot of inflation. And here was a coin that was trying to be deflationary, which attracted me a lot. I tried to buy Bitcoin in 2000. I think either 2012 or early 2012 or late 2011. I don't remember exactly. It was at $3 a coin, and I decided to send $2,000 to Mt. Gox.
Oh.
And went to the bank, filled out the forms, went to an Indian bank, filled out the forms, and then 1 week later got a rejection from the bank that they wouldn't be able to send my money to Japan because of some aspects, because I tripped up against some aspects of India's foreign currency rules. And so I missed my chance to buy something like 600 Bitcoins then. So yeah, I missed my billionaire shot right in 2011 or 2012. And because I had a good impression of Bitcoin, I wouldn't have been one of those people who bought it and forgot their private keys. It was simply like not my frame of mind at that time. And then after I failed to buy Bitcoin, I kind of forgot about it for 2 years. And then in 2013, I think my then girlfriend, now wife, came to me and said, do you remember about that Bitcoin thing you were talking about? I was like, yeah. It's trading at $90 a coin. And I was like, what? Like, so that started my second contact with Bitcoin, where it's like, okay, now I try to understand why was it at $90 or $100. And then that second contact basically got me completely into the crypto industry and the process of actually changing careers into crypto.
What was the first thing that appealed to you back then? Like, what was the thing that really made you consider, like, you had a pretty decent job in a very different industry that is probably one of the most stable industry. The pharmaceutical industry is probably like the least disruptible industry on the planet, like in general. So it's like, what was the thing that made you, obviously this thing went up like 30x from when you first saw it. So sure, number go up. But what was the thing that really was like, that's the thing and that's why I want to get into it?
Yeah. So I think like the initial interest was deflationary money.
Yeah.
The simple idea being, 21 million coins, 6 billion population in the world. I could see that this could be valuable. But actually the point at which I really decided that, I want to make a career out of it, that point actually came when I saw Vitalik present at Bitcoin Miami 2013 or 2014, and this was like the January or December.
Was that when he talking about Ethereum, or was that Vitalik's time at Bitcoin Magazine when he talked about Bitcoin?
No, so this is already past the point where initially Vitalik started being a writer for Bitcoin Magazine. I read all those articles in 2013, I think. And then in early 2014, he was already pitching Ethereum. And so I had read about, I had seen his talk in January of 2014 in Bitcoin Miami, something was the conference. Yeah. And then he was already talking by that point about smart contracts. He was already writing about smart contracts prior to that, so I had read about it, but he presented Ethereum and smart contracts then. And my sense was then, smart contracts. And I was like, I had wanted to be an investment banker. So, contracts. And contracts means futures contracts, options contracts, interest rate swaps, and all of these contracts that I had read about. And I knew that if you could make contracts in that programmatic form, you would be eventually headed down the path of disrupting Wall Street. And disrupting Wall Street is going to be a major industry. And so it kind of like that was the point at which I realized, this was actually going to be a big industry.
Yeah.
And then I kind of made a lot of effort to actively switch into it.
What does that mean? Like, what exactly did you do at that time? Because you still had your great job, working in pharmaceuticals. What did you do to actually get then into crypto? Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. So my central challenge back then is, I had a great job, right? And my central challenge was, I didn't know any programming, and I wasn't particularly interested in computer science. Though I was good at understanding algorithms, I wasn't interested in computer science. I was way more interested in biotech. And I had always struggled at programming, meaning I would be able to conceive of the algo, but when it actually came to writing the program, I would make like lots of mistakes, like, not having the comma, not having the colon. And then I would get tired of fixing those things, and like the bug fixing used to tire me out. In fact, it has taken the invention of ChatGPT to finally make me into a programmer now, 10 years later. So my problem was like not a programmer, not particularly interested in computer science, interested in finance, and this is a financial field, but I could also see that like the field valued software engineers a lot more, right? So if you were a software engineer, probably the best thing would have been at that point to just get becoming something like a core developer in like Bitcoin Core. So that was my challenge, and kind of I struggled against that challenge for 3 years, and I did various experiments back then. So one of the experiments I did was, okay, write a white paper.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of white paper I wrote was something which was describing the Cosmos ecosystem as it currently is today.
What was it called back then? What you wrote?
I wrote a white paper called an architecture for the Internet of Money.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the idea that you could take PBFT, practical Byzantine fault tolerance, and you could have lots of these crypto ledgers, these blockchains, and then you could have these protocols to send money between crypto ledgers.
Yeah.
And then the end user experience would essentially be that you forget about what ledger your asset is in. Like the ledger is kind of, the blockchain is kind of irrelevant. It's your asset that matters. And how to achieve that by a combination of having lots of ledgers powered by PBFT at that time, and then protocols with which two crypto ledgers or two blockchains could interact with each other. That paper is still there, and actually, like, I think the paper got the vision of Cosmos right? And
Yeah.
at some level, like when you look at like current Ethereum's kind of heading in that vision too. So I tried writing that paper, and the problem is that, well, when you write a paper like that, maybe 50 people will read it or 30 people will read it, and then if you can't build that system, you don't get very far, right? So like that's the problem of the theorist, right? The theorist can write a theory, but nobody cares about your theory unless you build it and you are able to raise money and you're going and eventually get some commercial success to it, and that's the ingredient that was missing. So then essentially I think Brian from Epicenter like came across this work that I had done writing this white paper, and he heard one of my interviews about this white paper, and he thought I would make a good co-host. I would be able to ask questions about crypto. And then so that's how I started off being a co-host at Epicenter, which was something that really worked.
Yeah. I think already back then, like, it was very early, so it was kind of difficult to get access to information.
Yeah.
It was even more difficult to get access to kind of credible information. And like the overall quality of everything was very low. And I mean, today people understand as very low quality as like mindless shilling and stuff. Of course, that was there as well. But like generally access to information was very difficult. So things that we consume now in docs, in like nicely prepared, even textbooks, it all wasn't there, right? So sometimes I feel, things that people like yourself needed to dig into took like way more time back then than you can now consume in a, Coursera that probably takes you 120 minutes.
Yes. And also like back then, the problem of information overload did not exist. So today, if you drive into crypto, there's so many newsletters, so many projects that you will suffer the problem of what do I even focus on? Back then, the only thing that was there was the Bitcoin Talk forums. And then if you were really crazy, you would go to some of the altcoin forums like the Peercoin forum or the NXT forum, which were quite big then. And then that was it. And then there was Bitcoin Magazine, and Vitalik Buterin was the only interesting author in Bitcoin Magazine. The rest of them were like pretty average. So my entire signal was like just reading through Bitcoin Talk and Vitalik, and that would be 1 or 2 hours a day, and you could, be caught up with the crypto industry. This is very different from from where we are today, where the problem is exactly the opposite, right?
Yeah.
There's too much info,
Yeah.
and you have information overload.
Yeah. So like one thing that I recommend to people is, of course, check out Epicenter to get an overview of what's going on. What do you recommend to people who want to get started today? Like if you discover, crypto in the year 2023, you finally discovered, despite everything that JP Morgan has told you, that it actually isn't a scam. So where do you get started? Like what do you tell people who are started to get exposed to it today?
Yeah. So I think if you're a software engineer or a platforms engineer, the path is quite easy. If I would just recommend. I'd just recommend like you to actually get a part-time job or full-time job or a project in the space. And the challenge there is going to be, hey, which project?
Exactly.
Right? Because all of these projects ultimately want software engineering skill set. So I think the demand is really strong. So it's going to be easy, but your problem is going to be which project do I pick? And my recommendation there is pick a project that has an obvious and good business model. So we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
That is where I would start with. So if you are an engineer, it's relatively easy. I think the much harder problem is if you're not an engineer. And so if you're not an engineer, what may you be? I mean, you might be a marketing person. You might be kind of like a literature person, right? Like who's very good at writing, but he particularly hasn't done marketing or PR yet. You might be kind of like an economist, right? Like those kinds of people usually get interested in crypto. Or the hardest cases are those where like a doctor gets interested in crypto, right? And so crypto is much harder for any of like people coming in from any of these backgrounds. If you're an economist, I think the line you should take is you should try to become a research analyst. So this would include research analysts at like crypto funds, like a lot of these Paradigm, Pantera, Messari, all of these.
Do you have any suggestions of things that I should look at, like skills to acquire specifically if I wanted to go down that road? Like what should I look at?
Yeah. I think if you're going down the research analyst path, what you want to do is you want to look at some of the most successful protocols. Now, this includes Ethereum, but then this also includes things like Uniswap or Maker, or stuff outside the Ethereum ecosystem, maybe something like Osmosis. And what you want to do is you want to publish something about the economics of these platforms or the governance of these platforms. Like take part in governance, take part in the economics, publish and write, use ChatGPT to write really effectively. And once you have some kind of like participation in governance or blog posts, use that as a base to apply into all of these crypto firms and apply more on the research side of all of these crypto firms. I think like this is a path that is accessible to economists and actually many people like coming in from the humanities who would be naturally very good at writing but not good at programming. So get into governance and economics.
I think that's maybe the area where there's more opportunities now than there were 8 years ago, because there is so much more on this governance. There's like formal structured governance that has roles that weren't available several years ago. And just like a micro anecdote here on Meher, on MakerDAO is one of the projects that Meher mentioned. I remember, I don't know which year that was, 2015 probably, I had a meeting with Meher, but Meher had to leave the meeting because there was a MakerDAO governance call. And Meher was always attending the Maker governance calls to really participate, there's a lot of materials that you can engage with. You have to be driven to it.
Yeah. Pick a protocol that you're interested in, and engage in it. And often, like if you're engaging in the governance of a protocol, look at all the firms that invested in that protocol. So let's say you're really keen on DYDX. I'm taking an example. So if you engage in DYDX governance, how their V4 system works, you have written, let's say, 2 articles on it. Look at who is invested in DYDX, and you'll see like 10 firms that have done that. And then, try to apply to jobs in those firms, and I think like that's actually a path that will work.
Okay, that's a very interesting path that you describe here for people, even when you're not an engineer.
Yeah. When you're not an engineer, and then actually like there's a third kind of person. Like if you're a trader, if you're a software engineer, then there's a clear path. If you are kind of from the humanities and interested in kind of research and governance, and then eventually investing, that's the path, get into governance. And then a third path that works quite well is actually in the trading line, where if you have any kind of quant trading experience, or even like analog trading experience where you are making buy and sell decisions. So this can be in the commodities world, for example, or it could be in the quantitative trading world. Then I think you will find that there are equivalent kind of roles in the crypto industry. And the point where you would want to focus is the exchange space, the exchange and OTC desk space. And for even for like this kind of person, it will be pretty obvious what firms to scan and then what kind of positions to apply for.
Okay, cool. Now that we heard a bit some opportunities for getting, how people could get started. Tell us what you're doing now. Like you're doing Epicenter, which we mentioned, but you're also the co-founder of one of the biggest staking companies on the planet called Chorus One. Tell us maybe a bit, what is the problem that you guys are solving? Because it seems to people who are new in the crypto space, like, what is this? Like crypto is about, self-custody and self-management of funds. Like, why does it need a company like you to begin with? What is the problem you guys are solving before we then talk like how you actually solve that problem?
Yeah. So the central insight of any crypto network is ultimately that it is possible to distribute accounting to hundreds of parties in the world. So maybe one way we can think of a crypto network is like many crypto networks, you can imagine them as an evolution of ledgers. And so if you go back 200 years, well, you're going to find the money lender in a village or a town, and the money lender has a big, what is it called in German, a Hauptbuch, or an accounting book, in which the money lender is essentially tracking how much money has been lent to which parties, and then when does money need to be collected from these parties. And so this is entirely tracked manually, and it is tracked by this kind of money lender business in the beginning, and then eventually this money lender business is kind of replaced by the bank. And even if you go to like the 1950s and 1960s, if you imagine a bank in the 1950s and 1960s, it consists of like lots of clerks, what are called clerks, which are people sitting on the banking floor with and they are essentially maintaining some accounts in like ledgers, which are again like these
in
physical
books.
physical books in and actual books, right? And so when you're a customer of this bank, you're going to one of the clerks who's responsible for your account, and then you're either depositing money or withdrawing money or asking for a loan, and the entire system is powered by these clerks. But you can imagine like that the bank has kind of like one massive ledger, and then that massive ledger is kind of broken down into smaller ledgers, and then these clerks are managing these small parts of their ledger.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of ultimately they have methods to reconcile and create the massive ledger for the bank. So that's the kind of like the imagination of the bank in the 1960s or 1970s. And then comes the first wave of computerization, right? So first wave of computerization is 1978, 1981. That's when Oracle is founded. Relational databases are kind of maturing as a technology. So the idea becomes we can replace the bank ledger, the mini ledgers and the major bank ledger by a relational database. And then whenever you go and deposit money into the bank, it's just another entry into that database. And withdrawals is another entry. And so that entire wave of computerization happens over the next 20 years, 1980 to 2010 or something like that. And now all the banks are essentially computerized. They manage all of their ledgers as databases. And usually banks have also outsourced the running of these databases to other software providers. So when you're going to a bank, they don't manage their ledger themselves. They are being managed by some third-party vendor that the bank has. And that's it. And one way to imagine a crypto network is it's taking that ledger, and then fundamentally a crypto network is asking the question, can you have not one party manage the ledger, but actually distribute the management of that ledger to hundreds of parties across the internet? And so every crypto network is effectively doing that. There is a ledger which is tracking who owns how much of a coin. So a crypto ledger is usually not tracking loans like what a bank ledger is. It is tracking who owns how much of a coin. But it's fundamentally distributing the maintenance of that ledger to not one party, but hundreds of parties around the world, ideally thousands. So these thousands of parties, they are, in modern terminology, they are called validators, right? They are essentially like a computer process that is kind of taking some part in the management of the ledger of a crypto network. And so what Chorus does is we run one of these validators for around 50 of these crypto networks. So you can imagine like 50 crypto networks, they have like these 50 of these giant ledgers, and we are one of the parties helping these 50 networks manage their ledgers. So maybe like that's one way to think of what we do.
Now, can you contrast that to the typical that people might be more familiar with, like home staking? Like what's that kind of like the pros and cons, or like like when does it even make sense to like talk to you guys as opposed to I can run my own thing like on my laptop. I have some old laptop at home, maybe I run this thing there. Like kind of what is the distinction in the use cases there?
Yeah. So the Ethereum network in particular has the idea of home staking, which is that they want ideally hundreds of thousands of people to run these validators at home and take a part in maintaining the Ethereum ledger. And usually the kind of people this appeals to is kind of the educated engineer that's interested in crypto, usually wants to run a home validator. But then there are other users for whom running a home validator is kind of maybe sixth in their list of things they want to achieve in their life. For example, if you're running a crypto fund, yes, the idea of running a validator for funds, Ether that you own, is appealing, but maybe a higher priority is to evaluate the 5 hot new protocols out there and determine which ones you want to buy. So all of these parties, they usually benefit from a different party like Chorus, where they can come to Chorus and say, hey, we have, 100 Ether. We would like to run 3 Ethereum validators. Can you run 3 Ethereum validators for us? And we have a service that would do that. So I think like a home validator is like the cottage industry, quote unquote. If you're really passionate about it, run a home validator. There are often people or institutions or companies that would not run a home validator, and then Chorus can offer that as a professional service that you can consume. So one way to think of it is it's the same as like cooking food, right? Like, yes, you can cook food in your kitchen if that is an enjoyable activity, but then you also have the business that is going to cook food at an industrial scale, which is the restaurant. And the home staker is like the cook that's like cooking in their kitchen and validating. We are more like the restaurant where you can come and you can order and you can have validation on your tokens.
Like another analogy that I think about is, there's this concept of a private bank, right? So when I came as a student to Switzerland, I wanted to open a bank account. Somebody told me, no, this is the wrong office, like there's a private bank there. And I thought, yeah, I'm a private individual, so I open a bank account there. But then unfortunately I learned that private banks are only, for people who are 6 digits and up to open an account. Are you more like a private bank or are you more like a retail bank?
So fundamentally we are a like retail bank, right? Meaning, in that analogy, right? So one question is, I think the question is about what is the minimum amount you need in order to stake with Chorus One.
Yeah.
And the idea there is like, there is no minimum. On all of these, in most of these 50 networks, there is no minimum.
So I can come in with 1 ETH that I might want to stake and...
Yeah. The only exception is Ethereum, where in Ethereum, usually to run a validator, you need 32 ETH, which is like 50,000 or 60,000 US dollars as of today. And for that, we are building and will launch in a month a system with which even people less than 32 ETH can stake with Chorus One directly.
Very cool.
So
can you already leak if that's going to be a liquid staking sort of thing, or in what direction it goes? It's fine if you can't.
No, it's not liquid staking, right? So liquid staking is the idea that you can stake small amounts of ETH and then you can receive a coin that represents your staked position. What we are doing is the simpler thing, which is you can stake ETH with Chorus One, but you won't get a coin. And you can withdraw as per the normal Ethereum process. The reason we are not creating a coin is because there's regulatory uncertainty with holding staked ETH coins. So for example, if we build a product where you come and you stake with Chorus and you get like a coin which represents your ETH staked with Chorus, well, will that coin be thought of as a security with the regulators? Probably yes. We don't want to venture into that territory, so we've kind of not gone down that path.
I think you have a pretty good instinct in that domain, kind of consciously setting up shop in Switzerland and not in the US. I think especially if we look at the latest developments in the space, has been an extremely smart choice that you made there.
Yeah, so actually we set up in the US first. As a company, and then 1.5 years into the life of the company, we realized that the US was going to be really hostile,
In contrast to many others, you realize that.
Yeah, and then we actually not migrated. It's not that we moved the company from the US, but we shut down the US company and we opened up a Swiss company. And then I physically moved from the US to Switzerland because I could see that it was going to be train wreck in that country. But still, I think the thing about US regulations is you really can't go out of US and think you're immune to US regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So the US regulatory policy is very much to project their regulatory structure onto the entire world.
Yeah.
As soon as your business deals with an American citizen.
Yeah.
So if you want to deal with American citizens, which we want to, fundamentally we want to include them into all of the products we build. The products we build has to comply to American regulations, which is why even in our ETH-staking product, we aren't creating any coin that can be used and that can be interpreted to be a security. So yeah.
All agencies listening will hear that. Yeah. Now, we heard from you kind of, where you're coming from, what you recommend to others, and what you're doing right now, which is, one of the few profitable business opportunities in the crypto space, I would say, is staking, just because it's painful to stake from home, and therefore many people rely on it, especially large institutions and holders, of course, need professional services that Curse One and others can provide. But tell us a little bit, like, to end up on a last short topic, is like, where's this headed? Like, what is this kind of end game of crypto in your worldview here? Is it all about number go up? Is it about like where does this go? What is the high level vision that you're having for it?
Yeah. So kind of my high level idea is that crypto tokens are not money. Mm-hmm. Crypto tokens are equity in distributed computer networks. And so I can kind of like try to explain what that means. So when you think of a traditional business, right, like imagine let's imagine Amazon, right? So fundamentally Amazon is not that hard to imagine, right? Like it's a company that's buying a bunch of books and then selling a bunch of books, let's say, at a markup to the price they bought the books at. And there's human labor and there's capital that they need in order to perform this service, right? So they need, probably Amazon employs like 100,000 people for its delivery of books and logistics business. And then it makes up, so it has a product. So the product is the ability to buy books. It has costs, which is whatever it costs to run its logistics engine. It has profits, which is revenues minus costs is like the profits. And then it has shareholders' equity. So what shareholders' equity is basically a claim on the profits of Amazon from now until infinity. So what is fundamentally being tokenized in equity is you take the profit stream of Amazon and you tokenize the profit stream from now until infinity, and that token is essentially the Amazon share. And my view is the underlying financial reality of crypto networks is exactly the same, where you can take a network like Ethereum and you can say, what is Ethereum's product? Well, the Ethereum network's product is the ability to deploy and host smart contracts. That's the product, right? Like if you're a developer, you write some code, Ethereum will deploy your code and it will run your code. And it will make sure nobody interferes with your code for eternity. Right? That is Ethereum's product. Ethereum has a revenue model. What is Ethereum's revenue model? It is fundamentally when a user interacts with the code you deploy, the user pays a transaction fee, and the Ethereum network collects this transaction fee, essentially. And this transaction fee is something like, I think, $5 or $6 billion a year. It's not a small number, right? The aggregate transaction fee of Ethereum. And then the Ethereum network has costs, right? So what are the major costs of the Ethereum network? Well, there are actually two major costs. The first cost is the cost to operate the network, which is when Chorus is running validators on Ethereum, the Chorus business is kind of earning commission or some kind of revenue to run the accounting software. And so the Ethereum network as a whole is paying all of these validators to run the accounting software in one way or another. And those are kind of like the costs of that network. So if you think like, okay, revenue is like the user transaction fees, and there's another thing which is called like the MEV. But MEV is kind of like very abstract to understand. So let's say transaction fees is the revenue, and then the cost is actually the cost of running infrastructure. If you subtract those out, the Ethereum network makes a profit, and the Ethereum network is actually very profitable. And in my view, the profits of the Ethereum network, so if you think of the profits of the Ethereum network, every day the network runs, it makes a profit, and from now until infinity, it will keep making a profit. And the Ether token is a fractional claim on the profits of the Ethereum network. So once you have that picture, well, what is a blockchain or what is a crypto network really? So a crypto network is kind of like a new way of organizing human activity. So, like corporations or companies are one way of organizing human activity, where a lot of people come together, they produce a product, they produce a profit, and then there are other people that are equity holders. And a crypto network is exactly the same with two differences, like I think 2 or 3 differences. The first is the workings of a corporation are completely intransparent to people outside the corporation. But the workings of Ethereum are completely transparent. The code that is running, the transactions that are happening, there is an enormous amount of transparency. And then the other thing is, in a corporation, there's a central management that makes decisions. And you can usually identify a set of 3 or 4 key people that call the shots in any corporation. So in Apple, this would be a Tim Cook. In Ethereum, you will find it quite hard to identify 3 or 4 people that have complete control over the future of Ethereum.
In the style of Tim Cook having
in the style, yes. Mm-hmm. So that control is distributed over a lot more people, and the workings are completely transparent. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I think of like all networks, like Ethereum, Bitcoin, but then also like the Solana, the Cosmos, the Osmosis, the Polkadots of the world. So in the end, I think like this is one way of organizing labor, organizing capital for the digital age. And just like there is no end in the usage of corporations, meaning like we invented corporations in 1500, then came the East India companies, they were very successful corporations 400 years ago. Then came the railroad companies, they were very successful in the 1800s. Then came the software corporations. So you took the idea of the corporation and you applied it to different industries. I think the same thing is going to happen to crypto. We have the idea of the open and transparent and controlled in a distributed fashion crypto network. it has its equity, that the equity is the crypto token, and we are going to increasingly apply it in industry after industry after industry, and it's going to take hundreds of years to actually unfold. And the current crop of crypto networks will be outcompeted by the next crop, which will be outcompeted by the next crop again. And this endless cycle of capitalism will kind of continue, just like it does in the corporate world.
Very interesting. So you're basically, and you're basically seeing we're now at this like shift of moving from generation N of kind of this corporate, disruption that is entirely being disrupted by a different animal, so to say, that is crypto networks that will then within itself like disrupt each other.
Yes. And so I don't think there is an end state. I don't think there is like some end state that X and Y and Z have won and everything settles around those networks. I think like the process of capitalism, right? Like there's creative destruction. So you have winners, they persist for 20 years, 30 years, and then the next generation of disruptors come and they disrupt them. And then the disruptors again become disrupted again in the next cycle. And I think kind of like this cycle will always continue.
Nice. That's a really long-term view that I appreciate, Meher. Maybe let's finish up on some thinking like in his deep thoughts. Some last recommendations for someone who wants to look into the space. What would you say if you can something to somebody who's now considering after listening to you, saying, hey, I might want to check it out. Some last recommendations for them.
I think one of the things that you could really do is you could identify some of the values that are dear to you, and you could try to include them in the work you do. So what do I mean? For example, there are many people around the world that are concerned about the value of privacy, right? They are fundamentally scared about like surveillance capitalism, and they would like to build things that kind of usher in new business models that are fundamentally not surveillance capitalism at their heart, like new business models where people are not being charged, or like the corporations are not charging, I'm not making money by selling people's data, right? So if you hold that kind of value, that kind of value is dear to you, well, the crypto has a very large kind of space where people are fundamentally building privacy preserving systems and ultimately business models.
Yes.
And like HOPR is one of them. So if that value is extremely dear to you, you can filter out much of crypto into like what are projects that kind of I identify with in my values, and you can try to go after those projects, right? Like again, like if you are a software engineer, it's easy. If you're not, then kind of research and do governance around them. So like privacy is one of those big values. Another value is kind of a lot of people care about the distribution of economic power across the world, and this value is essentially that they would like wealth to be distributed more equally in the world, right? So they would like the Gini coefficients of societies to be lower. Crypto as a whole is not particularly, I don't think it has particularly succeeded in like distributing wealth equally around the world. Yeah. But there are like corners of crypto where people try to achieve this in one way or another. Like, So you might want to look at like kind of like all kinds of UBI schemes that crypto entrepreneurs are thinking of, which is
we just had an episode where Friederike Ernst from Gnosis talked also about the Circles UBI going exactly that direction.
Exactly. So if you care about like the distribution of wealth and power in the world, then there are corners of crypto that you will feel attracted to, and you should go after those corners. So ultimately, like, there can be lots of different values, and probably you will find something in crypto that kind of agrees with your value. If you're kind of like fundamentally an anarchist, for example, like an anarchist is, well, in the modern era, it is somebody who doesn't quite agree with the idea of the nation state. Well, then you will find like the idea of the network state in crypto. And then you'll find this Zuzalu network state that is being built in, I think, Montenegro or something like that. That seems like such an interesting experiment, isn't it? So maybe you want to follow that project. So I think all of us are different and we prioritize different values. So maybe like that's also one way of finding something fulfilling in crypto.
Okay. Thank you so much, Meher, for joining us today.
Cool. Thank you for having me.